Hello everyone, it is Editing Brittany here, Brittany from the future. I wanted to just kind of come on here and formally open the vlog as well as do a little bit of housekeeping as to what you can expect in this vlog. Namely because when I first started reading the Book of the Year Finalists, I did not do them in any type of order. That was not my plan to do them in any type of order. I was just kind of reading them or listening to them as they came in from my library. I would be reading books for this vlog, which is going to feature the 2020 Book of the Year Finalists, when I still needed to read books for the 2016 and 2017 years. And so within this vlog, you are going to kind of notice that there is going to be a shift in sound quality because some of the earlier clips I filmed prior to having this microphone and some of the later clips I had after this microphone, but they are also not going to be in that specific order because I am chronologically ordering the clips. So this vlog is specifically going to feature the 2019, 2020, and 2021 Book of the Year finalists that I haven't already read. I'm going to be reading them and I'm going to be telling you my thoughts and feelings on them as I read them. And so the clips in this vlog are ordered from 2019 to 2020 and not 2021 because I've actually read all those books and I'll get to that in just a second. But you're going to see some of the clips for 2019, which I filmed after reading some of the books for 2020. So I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of context that the sound quality in this vlog is going to be a little bit all over the place just because of when I read the stories, and I apologize about that. We're now really getting to a place within all of my projects and vlogs that I'm doing that for the most part, all of the clips should be with my microphone. Now, really quickly, before we start getting into reading the books and talking about my thoughts and feelings, I just wanted to quickly run through all of the books that were finalists for each year and which ones that I have to read. So for 2019, the winner was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I have already read and absolutely adored. We also have Recursion by Blake Crouch. I did tell you that we would be seeing Blake Crouch again, and here we are, and I have already read that. A Woman Is No Man by Etoph Rum, as well as This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger, were both 2019 finalists that I have not read and will be featured in this vlog. And then the final book was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, which I had already read. In 2020, the winner was The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which is another book I will be reading in this vlog, as well as The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Daré and Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. The two that I had already read prior to this were The Guest List by Lucy Foley, as well as The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. And then again, for 2021, I have read all of the finalists and winners. The winner was The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Again, we are seeing Taylor Jenkins Reid. Then we have People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry, which I adored. Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, which y'all know I am obsessed with. And then The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner, which I did also read prior to this point. So those are all the finalists for the 3 years covered in this vlog. And then at the very end, when I'm finalizing my thoughts and feelings on the last book that I read, I will also talk about my overall thoughts and feelings on these finalists and whether or not I enjoyed the books, whether or not I thought that they deserved to be finalists. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and start getting into the vlog clips for this round of reading Book of the Year finalists. Hello everyone, good afternoon. I am coming to you looking a little bit like a potato. I just got off work, but while I'm in the quiet of my home before my husband gets here, I wanted to go ahead and come on and give you an update because I have now reached the 50% mark of the next book for this project, which is This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger. This is one of the 2019 finalists. Now, as part of this project, I am reading a lot of books that I would not have normally picked up. I'm definitely reading a lot of books outside of my comfort zone or books that I find intimidating for one reason or another, and I would say that This Tenderland is probably one of the books that I found the most intimidating out of all of them. And I'm not entirely sure why. I know that this is a very, very beloved book. And I think what I found intimidating just kind of was like the synopsis of it. I knew that it was going to be a very historical, literary fiction type story. And it follows a bunch of young kids. And that is really not my vibe. And so I was very much worried that this was going to be another DNF for me. But I'm thankful to say that almost 50% in, I am actually really enjoying it. And I find myself pretty compelled by the story. Not necessarily emotionally invested in it just yet, but still enjoying my overall reading experience. So This Tenderland is essentially a coming of age story that is set in the Great Depression, and it starts at the Lincoln Indian Training School in northern Minnesota, and that's where we meet our main character, who is 12 at the time. His name is Odie O'Banion, and he and his brother Albert are the only two white kids at this Indian training school, and they are left there because they are orphaned. They don't have a mother and father. Both of them are dead, and so they were kind of placed in the care of this Indian training school, who who took them in despite the fact that they are not in fact Indian. And as you can kind of imagine, this is not a great place to be. This Indian training school is not a kind place to be. The people who own it and run it, they are not good people, and they allow terrible things to happen at this school. And one day something pretty tragic happens, and it kind of forces Odie and Albert to realize that they need to leave. And so they actually take their friend Mose, who is at the school. He is mute because somebody cut out his tongue when he was a young child. And so he has to sign in order to communicate. And they end up taking him as well as a young 6-year-old girl named Emmy. Emmy was the daughter of one of the beloved teachers at the Indian training school who tragically lost her life in a sudden tornado. And Emmy is placed within the care of the people who run the training school, and she does not want to be there. So she begs the boys to take her with them. And so they ultimately end up departing on a journey to go down the Mississippi River. And so this is really kind of all about that journey and the vivid characters that they meet along the way. They're definitely experiencing hard lessons during this time about poverty, about faith, and even racism, right? Because they have Mose along with them, who is an Indian and who is not going to be treated kindly by everyone. There is certainly a level of adventure to the story, right? Because you have a bunch of kids who are now going down the Mississippi River, trying to survive, trying to get to somewhere safe. In that regard, I would say that this has Huck Finn vibes. Now, I say that as somebody who has not read Huckleberry Finn, but who has read James. So I kind of understand the overall story of Huckleberry Finn. And there are also definitely themes of like found family and surviving in a very broken world. And then yes, as I said, I am for the most part really enjoying this. I'm not having a bad time at all, and I do feel pretty compelled. I'm really interested to see what the trajectory of the story is going to be and where they ultimately end up. And I cannot even imagine trying to embark on something like this. You know, Odie is 12 and his brother I think is 4 years older. So he is the oldest at 16, and they are also trying to take care of a 6-year-old girl. They have no money, they have no food, they have to try to figure out how to survive. And on top of this, it's not even just about survival from the normal things like food. It's also because they are in danger. There's like a bounty on their head because they are literally fugitives from the law at this point, because not only have they run away from the school, but they have taken Emmy, and they were not supposed to take Emmy. So they have to keep their head down. They don't know if they can trust anybody that they encounter, the adults along the way. So this is really just about their adventures along the Mississippi River, the people they meet, and the growing up that they do along the way. And I really am intrigued to see where this goes. If I'm understanding correctly, I do believe that this story is being told from Odie in the future. Like, he is an older man who is now telling us his life story of this time when he was 12 and he ran away from the school and he's going down the Mississippi River. And I do find that it is pretty, you know, atmospheric because it is set outside for the most part as they are going down the Mississippi River, and they're having to camp in the woods and they're having to do all of this stuff. So yes, I am really grateful to say that I am very much enjoying this more than I was expecting to. And I think for the most part, that has been the theme with a lot of the books that I have picked up for this project. And I'm really hoping that that pattern continues. I do hope to finish this book by tomorrow. It is, you know, on the longer side. It is about a 14-hour audiobook. And so I'm just kind of like plugging my way through it because I do want to try to read the other 2 books that I need to read for this vlog as soon as possible so I can get this up for you as soon as possible. So we're going to see, but yeah, I'm not having a terrible time with this at all. And I will come on here when I've actually finished it. All right, everyone. So I have officially finished This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger, and I wanted to come on here and share some of my final thoughts on the story and my experience. I ultimately ended up really enjoying the story, and I really enjoyed some of the themes that were tackled in this story as well. So I believe that I mentioned in my opening clip that this is really a coming of age story. I don't know if I actually did mention that this is set in 1932, so Depression era America. So this is a very hard time in America. It is a time of great struggle. A lot of people have lost everything. And so when we have these 4 orphans who are taking off down the Mississippi River, they definitely encounter a lot of hardship and danger, but they also encounter a lot of kindness and moments of grace. And one of the pervading themes throughout the story was that home is not necessarily a place. Home can be the people that you're with, and you can make a home anywhere as long as you are with the people that you love, right? Because another theme of this is really about belonging. Because, you know, we're dealing with 4 orphans. They have lost their parents. They don't really feel like they belong anywhere. They've been living at this very abusive Indian training school for the past several years, and they just want to find home. They want to find a place that they can belong. So there was definitely a pervasive theme of belonging, found family, and finding a home in not necessarily a place, but with people. There was also, of course, a lot of themes of injustice and oppression, not even just at the Lincoln Training School, which was abusive, but it also dealt with cultural erasure, right? You have these kids who are basically literally told, save the child, but but kill the Indian, right? And so they are growing up their entire lives believing that who they are is wrong and having their cultural identity stripped away. And that's really well explored here with the character of Mose, who throughout this journey down the Mississippi River really starts to connect with his heritage as a Sioux and what that means for him and what that has meant for his people and all of the terrible things that have happened to his people. And he kind of has to come to grips with that. And this is also definitely a lot about survival and hope, and how even in the direst of circumstances, there's always something that you can look forward to. I was just kind of grateful to be along on this journey with these characters and to get to know them and their struggles and what they experience. So yes, I really, really enjoyed this story. I thought that it was a very powerful story. So right now I think that I'm settling on a 4 stars. If I gave quarter ratings, I think I would definitely settle on like a 4.25 because I think it's better than a 4, but I don't necessarily know if I want to raise it to a 4.5. I think I'm going to sit on that for a little while longer and see, but it was definitely a very, very strong, beautiful, and incredibly atmospheric story as well, because they are outdoors, they are in nature. You can just imagine the dirt and the sweat and the heat and the hunger and all of the hard work that they are facing. So yes, ultimately a very, very positive reading experience. And I'm so glad that this ended up being a winner, because I really want to DNF as few of these books as possible. I really want to give these books a full and fair chance. And I've already DNF'd one with A Gentleman in Moscow, and I still have another A Martels that I have to try for this vlog. And I think if I'm going to DNF any of them, that is likely going to be it. So I'm really grateful that this one ended up working out. Yes, that's my wrap up for this Tenderland. I do still have 2 more books that I have to read for this vlog. I hope to get to them very, very soon so that I can wrap this up fairly quickly and get it out to you, but we're gonna see. Ultimately, this one is still going very, very well. I'm having a great time and experiencing all these books that I might not otherwise have read if it hadn't been for this project.
People sure think they know what seems best. Too tired to argue, let's give it a rest. Yeah, pay no mind to what I just said.
Hello everyone, I am back with another update because I am now 50% of the way through my next read, which is A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Rum. This is basically a multi-generational story that follows the lives of 3 Palestinian women who are all in the same family. First we have Isra. In the early 1990s, she is just turned 17 and she's essentially now to the age where she can be put into an arranged marriage. It's not something that she wants, but her new husband Adam actually lives in America, and so she hopes that by moving to America, she's going to experience more freedom than she currently does as a woman in Palestine. But when she gets to America and she realizes that she's going to be living in the same home as her in-laws as well as Adam's siblings, and she kind of experiences life there, she realizes that she's not going to have much more freedom, if any freedom at all. She's not allowed to leave the house on her own. She's not allowed to go out. She's essentially a prisoner in her home, and she's basically told, you know, your job is going to be to bear children for Adam, and you're going to cook and clean and be in service to him, essentially. We're also following in 2008 Dea, which is actually Isra's firstborn daughter, and pretty much within the very first few pages of Dea's chapter, we learn that Isra and Adam are no longer with us. They were killed several years ago, and she and her sisters were raised by Farida, which was Adam's mother. And Dea is now 18, and so of course she's to that age where it is time for her to be married off, but this is not something she wants at all. She was born and raised in America. She knows that there are other opportunities for women in America. She wants to go to college and stuff like that, but her grandmother is not hearing of it. Farida is a very much traditional, conservative Arab woman, and she believes that it's important to continue the Arab culture. And we do get her perspective, and we can see how her perspective really is all about perpetuating the silence and stuff that Arab women have to go through. And so she is forcing Dea into an arranged marriage. And we're getting her perspective primarily right now in the early 1990s, after Isra has just moved into the home and she starts bearing children and everything that is happening during that point. I don't know if we are going to get Farida's perspective later on in the same period as we are getting Dea's perspective. I definitely understand the importance of the story because this is shedding light on, I feel, a bunch of taboo topics that are not necessarily talked about, like the domestic abuse, the mental health, the gender oppression in like Arab families, and that's really being brought to light and discussed. Another thing that I think that this book is doing really well is discussing the struggle between honoring cultural heritage but also wanting independence and wanting to also belong within this new culture that you are a part of, right? But I will say that something that I am finding within this story is that the overall themes and messages of it are very heavy-handed. They are very hit you in the head, right? Because this story very much hits the point home that Arab women, their whole job in life is to be subservient to men. They're are very oppressed by men, they are abused by men, and they are also essentially sexually assaulted by men, because a lot of these women experience marital rape even if they don't want to be having sex with these men. They are forced to have sex with these men because that is their job as their wife. It is their job to bear these men children. And so that is reiterated over and over and over. This is very, very repetitive throughout the story. And I want to just quickly acknowledge here that I am not educated in any way, shape, or form into the Arab culture. It's not something that I've personally experienced. It's not something that was really taught to me in school. Basically, my only knowledge of this culture is what is portrayed in American media, whether it's the news or movies and whatnot. And quite frankly, I think that the American media tries its hardest to make us look down on this culture. So reading this book as an American, it's really easy for me to just kind of take Etaf Ram at her word, that this is how it is for all Arab women, or at least those who come from a traditional conservative Arab family. You know what I mean? Especially since she herself is like Palestinian American, and I assume that she has firsthand experience with some of the things that she is writing about. But at the same time, I don't necessarily believe that this is as nuanced as it could be, especially when it comes to Arab men. Pretty much all of the Arab men so far that have been depicted in the story, they have been abusive, they have been oppressive, they have been very, very controlling. Like I said, I am not the person to speak about this culture. I'm not the person who can say whether or not this depiction is accurate or whether it's not, but I do feel like the story does very much portray a one-dimensional picture of Arab culture, and it is somewhat like perpetuating, I don't know if stereotypes is what I'm looking for, but I do feel like some of what is being told in this story is kind of in line with what we are fed within the American media, if that makes sense. But at the same time, I applaud Etaf Ram for giving a voice to some of these very real issues, and it definitely challenges the silence and the shame. So at this point, I would say that I am having a decent enough time with it. It was almost pretty much instantly compelling to me. I was pretty much instantly invested in what was happening and what was going on. But I do find it a little bit repetitive and frustrating in its repetitiveness. I would like a little bit more nuance in the representation. But yeah, ultimately, I am having a decent time with this. I do find it pretty easy to read and fly through, and hopefully I will be finishing this tomorrow and can wrap it up for you. All right, everyone. So I have officially finished A Woman Is No Man by Etaf Ram, and I'm having some mixed feelings about it. I can definitely say that from the first page, I found it to be pretty compelling and intriguing, and it was easy to read. Not in terms of subject matter, which was definitely harder hitting, but just in terms of the way that it was written. I didn't find that the writing was difficult to read. And in some ways, I do feel like I can connect that to the lack of nuance that I mentioned in the previous clip. And so because of the simplicity of the writing and because of the lack of nuance, I don't feel as though I got the complexity from the story as I was expecting from an adult like literary fiction that was going to deal with such very difficult topics as this book faces. You know what I mean? And also, this book was incredibly, incredibly repetitive. We're consistently seeing the same scenes over and over. The characters are having the same conversations, the same arguments over and over and over again. Like, a woman's oppression is basically mentioned on every single page of the story. So Etaf Ram was not just trying to hit you over the head with this, she was trying to essentially bash your brains in. I definitely found that very, very frustrating. And also, I found it frustrating simply reading from specific characters' perspectives, right? Like, we have Farida, who is the worst, right? Because she is perpetuating all of this stuff that she believes about women and their place in the world and their role. Like, she firmly believes that a woman's whole goal in life is to get married and to bear children and to be subservient to her husband and to pleasure her husband. There is no other goal in life for a woman, and that's just a woman's law, and there's no changing it. And if a husband beats their wife, so be it. That is totally okay. That it's acceptable. It's been done that way for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? So she is of the mindset that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And even if it is broke, don't fix it, because this is the way that it's been done for hundreds of years and there's no need to change it. So I found her to be a very infuriating character to read from. So again, I am not the person to speak to the accuracy of this representation as somebody who is very, very white and who has very limited knowledge of the Arab culture. But I have read reviews for this book by people who are Arab, who are Palestinian, and they are quite frustrated with the representation in this story. And they clearly say that Etaf Ram does not speak for them. And because of that, I'm not really sure how I want to rate this. It was compelling from start to finish, in my opinion. I don't think that this was poorly written, and I don't think that this was a forgettable read. But at the same time, I feel like there were a lot of issues with this that would have needed to be addressed in order for me to give it a stronger read. So while my experience of it, despite the frustrations and despite the depressing nature of the story, would probably be maybe like a 4-star read, I feel like the actual technical execution of the story was probably closer to a 3. I might split the difference and give it a 3.5. This is one that I both understand the hype behind and don't understand the hype behind. So yeah, my feelings on this are obviously really, really complicated. I'm not entirely sure how I feel. So yeah, we're definitely hovering around a 3.5 at the moment, but I am glad that I finally got it done, because this was definitely another one of those books that I was nervous going into, because it's something that I never would have picked up otherwise. It's definitely outside of my comfort zone. And so I'm glad to have this one under my belt, but we are almost there with part 2 of reading Book of the Year finalists. Hello everybody, I apologize for the phone clip. I'm obviously currently at my office, but I wanted to come on here and give you an update because I have started the next book for this reading project. It is the first book for the 2020 Book of the Year finalists, and I wasn't expecting to get quite as far into this today as I already have, and so before I got any further into it, I did want to introduce the story. So the story that I'm talking about is The Girl with Loud Voice by Abby DeRay, and this follows a 14-year-old Nigerian girl named Aduni, and she and her family are definitely living in poverty in Nigeria. And she recently just lost her mother. Her mother is dead, and it's just her father and her 2 brothers. And because they are in such dire straits and they are in need of money, her father has actually decided to kind of sell Aduni into marriage with a wealthy older man who already has 2 wives. This man wants another wife because his other 2 wives have not yet been able to bear him any sons. And so that's what he wants Aduni for. And in exchange, he's going to pay Aduni's father quite a large sum of money for this, right? So Aduni's father has made this deal, and Aduni is absolutely devastated because she has big dreams. She wants to be educated. She wants to go to school. She wants to have a career. She wants to build a better life for herself. She wants to help her family build a better life. And that is now just all being completely taken away from her because of this. And so at the 20% mark, we are now to the point where Aduni has married this man. She has been living in his house for about 2 months, and we're following all of the things that are going along with it, you know, what she's experiencing during this time. And it's obviously like very, very heavy at points. And now that we've reached the 20% mark, I can thoroughly say that I am definitely intrigued and I am invested, and I am enjoying my reading experience as much as you can enjoy a reading experience that covers such serious topics such as these. It did take me a minute to get into the story. That's primarily for 2 reasons. First, because the audiobook narrator obviously is going to be utilizing a Nigerian accent, and so at first it was a little bit difficult for me to understand what the audiobook narrator was saying. I actually had to slow it down from like 2.2 to 1.5 speed so I could understand. But I will say that the audiobook narrator is phenomenal, and if you have an opportunity to listen to this book on audio, I highly recommend, because she's not just doing a great job like with the accent and bringing Aduni to life, but also bringing Aduni's emotions to life. Aduni is just a 14-year-old girl, right? And this is a lot for anybody to handle, let alone a 14-year-old girl who's being taken away from her home. She's being taken away from her family. She's put into this unfamiliar situation with a man she doesn't know, and she's going to be forced to bear him children, and she doesn't want any of this. And I feel like the audiobook narrator is doing a phenomenal job of bringing that to life. And one additional thing I found a little bit jarring was simply the fact that this book is kind of written in non-standard English grammar. So it's not written in grammar that we in the very like white Western world would consider proper grammar. And so that took a little bit of getting used to at first, but once you get into it, you're into it. And that's currently where I am right now. It's very easy to follow along and understand what is going on now. There are definitely some very important themes that are being discussed in this story. We definitely have a lot of talk about class and gender discrimination. Aduni lives in a very patriarchal society, and as part of this, she has these cultural expectations that she now has to meet, even though she really, really doesn't want to. You know, girls her age are expected to go off and get married, and that's exactly what is now happening to her, even though she wants none of it. And all of her dreams have been thrown out the window. They're being taken away from her, and that is just like absolutely devastating. As part of this, we are also dealing with themes of like domestic abuse and marital rape, because of course, nothing that is happening in the marital bed is with Aduni's consent. It is all happening to her. So all of this stuff is happening. At the same time, we're also definitely seeing themes of the importance of education. Aduni really believes in education as not just a tool, but a right. And it's something that can change the life of people, especially women, and especially women who are in Aduni's kind of place in life. This is a book that really was never on my radar. It's something that I've obviously heard about because it was very, very popular when it came out. But as it's like more literary in nature, it's not necessarily something that's within my comfort zone. So it's not something I ever really considered picking up prior to this project, but I am very much enjoying it at this point. So I think I'm going to kind of take my time with this. I'm not really going to rush through it. I just kind of want to like take my time with this experience and stay with Aduni for as long as possible. And I also have like other things that I'm doing and prioritizing. And so I think it's like perfect to just kind of slow this down and take my time with it. So yeah, I'll give you an update when I actually have more thoughts, and I'll check in later.
No matter how hard you try, wearing down every bone, but only just getting by. In my mind, there's nothing else you can do. The world is...
Hello everyone. I am here because I have finally finished The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi Dore. This is one, as I believe I alluded to when I introduced you to the book, that I really wanted to kind of take my time with. I really wanted to immerse myself in Aduni's life and her world because she is part of a culture that I'm very ignorant of, very unfamiliar with. And that is absolutely what I did. It took me several days to finish this book. I definitely understand why this book is so incredibly important because it does bring to light some injustices and things like that that you might not be familiar with. It's really difficult to think that in the modern day and age, people are still going through the things that Aduni has to go through, and that there are still places in the world that don't have a lot of the same major conveniences that we take for granted. You know what I mean? Like, it is 2014 in this story, and Aduni has never used the internet. She doesn't even really know what it is. She's never utilized a cell phone or anything like that. So again, this follows Aduni, who is a 14-year-old Nigerian girl living in a very, very small village in Nigeria, and her whole entire dream is just to obtain an education. That's something that her mother desperately wanted for her because she knew that education was Aduni's way out, was Aduni's way to a better life. But after her mother died, her father ended up basically selling her into a marriage with an older man who already had 2 wives. And at the point of my last update, she had been with this man for a couple of months, living in his household, being his wife. Then after that, something pretty tragic happens, and Aduni finds herself on the run. She thinks that she's going to be blamed for what happened, even though it wasn't her fault at all. And she doesn't think that she can stick around. So she ends up seeking help from a family friend. And that friend's brother actually takes Aduni to Lagos, a very large city in Nigeria, I think like one of the largest in Nigeria, to be a domestic servant to a very wealthy woman by the name of Big Madame. But unfortunately, Big Madame is not a kind woman to her. She routinely beats Aduni, and she says awful, demeaning things to Aduni. And so I would say like a strong majority of the story takes place while she is in Big Madame's household and all of the things that she is enduring during this time. But there is a ray of hope for her because also during this time, she meets a woman she calls Miss Tia. And Miss Tia is part of this like organization, society thing that Big Madame is also a part of. And during an event at the house, she meets Miss Tia and they have a conversation, and Miss Tia sees something in Aduni. And so she actually helps Aduni work on her English because there's this scholarship that she wants to apply for and she has to write an essay for it. And so this is about Aduni and her fight for her dreams, right? This is about her and wanting to be educated. And even during her time at Big Madame's house, she is taking advantage of the library when she can. She's reading this book about Nigerian facts. She's looking up all of these words in the Nigerian dictionary, and she's just trying to educate herself about the world because she has been sheltered. And I don't mean sheltered as in protected. I just mean because of her situation and her circumstances and where she is and the poverty and all of that stuff. She's very much limited in her experiences to what she knows from her village. And so her world is opened up when she moves to Lagos in more than one way. So it was just like very powerful and inspiring to watch her overcome what she's going through while still trying to obtain her dreams. She never gave up on those dreams. So this is a story about hope. This is a story about strength. And this is also a story about the power of education and what it can do for you. And that is also something that I think that we very much take for granted here. I found Aduni to be a very, very inspiring character. And I am, again, going to highly encourage you, if you can listen to this on audio, you need to listen to it on audio because I think that this was one of the most powerful audiobook performances I have ever listened to. The audiobook narrator really, really, really got into her performance with this story. And she just had so much emotion in her voice when she was reading. And I think that that is absolutely the way to go. Or even immersively reading this because there are definitely a lot of unfamiliar like words and names and stuff in this story. And I do think that it would have also been beneficial if I had been reading this with my eyeballs. So if you can read this immersively, I would also recommend that as well. I feel like that was a pretty strong start to the 2020 Book of the Year finalists. I, of course, will be back when I have started the next book for the 2020 year, whatever that may be.
Filled with color, and all you ever see is blue. I can see that it's wearing you down, and down low. When you pick yourself off of the ground.
Hello everyone, I am finally back with another update. I know it hasn't been very long for you, but it has actually been several weeks for me. I'm actually not really reading these books in any type of order, just kind of when they come in from my library so I can listen to the audiobook. And it's actually been several weeks since I finished The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby DeRay, which was a book for the 2020 year, but I was reading that when I still needed to read books for like the 2017 year. So it's all kind of chaotic and all over the place. But anyway, I am obviously here because I have started the next book for the 2020 year, which is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Now, this is a book that I have obviously heard about because when it came out, it blew up. It was absolutely everywhere. It was insanely popular. I knew just by like reading the synopsis of it and everything that it wasn't necessarily something that I was gravitating towards, but I definitely had some idea of what it was about. Now, I will say that for some reason, I had no idea that this was historical fiction. I was thinking that this was more contemporary literary fiction, but I was wrong. So that was a surprise going in. The Vanishing Half follows two twins, Desiree and Stella. At the beginning of the story, it is in the mid-1950s. They are 16 years old. They were born and raised in a small southern Black community in northern Louisiana. And Desiree has kind of always wanted to leave this place. She's a little bit more restless. She wants to get out. She wants to explore. She wants to do other things. Stella, I would say, is the more grounded twin, the more content one, the logical one, the calm one. But Stella too has big dreams. She's like intellectual. She loves school. She does well in school and she wants to go on to college. But when their mother comes to them and says, hey, you're 16 years old now. You've had enough schooling. I need you to drop out so you can help me with the finances, because she is a single mother. Their father was brutally killed by a bunch of white men several years ago. She's been doing it on her own and now she needs her daughter's help. And Stella is kind of watching her dreams go out the window and she's not really willing to let that happen. So she finally agrees with Desiree that they need to leave. And so they actually head a couple hours south to New Orleans to begin their new life and try to make their way. Now, this book is definitely not told in a linear format. So we see them head off to New Orleans and then we fast forward 14 years in the future. It's the late 1960s and we see Desiree actually going back to her small Louisiana hometown with her daughter in tow. She's escaping an abusive marriage and she has nowhere else to go. And something that's really important to know about this town is that it prides itself on being very, very light skinned, pretty much white passing for the most part. And so when Desiree comes home bringing her daughter, who is very, very dark skinned, her daughter becomes an oddity, a curiosity in this town. And as we're learning about Desiree's life and like what led her to this point when she moved to Washington, D.C. and she met her husband and fell in love and got married, and then what led her back to her town, we're also getting snapshots of other things that have been happening, including the fact that Stella, her twin, not too terribly long after they got to New Orleans, like maybe less than a year later, her twin ups and abandons her and just leaves her there with a note and goes and does her own thing, and she never hears from her twin again. And so at this point in the story, we don't really know what's happened to Stella, right? But in the present day, which is at this point 1968, we're following Desiree as she's trying to build a life back in her hometown, and as she's trying to figure all that out, we are of course learning more about her mother and her husband and all of these other characters, including a boy that she knew briefly when she was younger and who has just now entered back into her life, and he has the job of finding people. He's like a bounty hunter and he offers to find Stella for Desiree. And then we actually jump 10 years in the future to 1978 when Jude, Desiree's daughter, is all grown up and she is heading to LA. She's heading to UCLA on a track scholarship to go to college. Gotten there, she's taking classes and we're following her experiences there, especially as she's falling in love with a trans boy. Now, once Jude's perspective in 1978 ends, we are past the 40% mark of this story, right? We are like 44% of the way in, and Stella has not been an on-page character since they were 16 and running away to New Orleans. She has not been a huge presence in the story so far. So now that I'm nearing the 50% mark, we are finally seeing Stella back. We are flashing back to 1968. So that is the same time period in which Desiree is returning home, and we're following Stella in her current life, and we find out that she has married a white man. He was somebody that she actually met in New Orleans, and that's pretty much why she decided to leave New Orleans, and she married this man of wealth and privilege, and she decided that she was going to be white passing. Her husband knows absolutely nothing of her heritage. He thinks that her parents are dead and that she has nobody, that she's basically an orphan. And so now she's actually living in LA in a wealthy, privileged suburb, and she's actually trying to fight the inclusion of a Black family in their neighborhood. So obviously there are a lot of really, really complicated themes here of racial identity and belonging and heritage and culture and all of that, and how two physically identical people can choose such very different paths for their life. We see a lot of stories about people who have left their hometown for one reason or another. Maybe they're running away from a bad relationship. Maybe they're running away from the law. Like there is something that is pushing them to go out and start a new life. But I don't think I've ever read a story that is so firmly focused on running away from your own skin color. And I cannot even imagine the trauma that comes along with that. And I can't even imagine like how hard it is and how much shame she must feel. She feels shame because she is considered a colored person. That is the terminology that they use during this time in this book. And I'm sure that she's also feeling shame about feeling that shame. chain. But we haven't gotten into that yet, right? We haven't explored that yet because Stella is just now only coming on page. I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm now at about the 46% mark, so I'm just about halfway, and we are just now seeing Stella on page. I am really curious to see how all of this is going to come about and connect. Since Stella is in LA and Jude is in LA, I assume that their connection is going to be through Jude and Stella, or maybe Jude meets Stella's daughter, who is going to be the same age as Jude. And I'm interested to see how all of this connects and comes about. I will admit that I am very compelled, but at the same time, I'm not sure what the trajectory of the story is going to be. I think it's kind of lost the plot a little bit, which I will say is just like very minimal. This is a very, very character-driven story, and it is more about exploring these really important themes about racial identity and belonging and family and heritage and all of that stuff. And so it is a very, very meandering story. It is absolutely not told linearly. Like I said, it's making this feel like a very, very slow reading experience, because while I do feel a little bit compelled, I feel like I should be further into this story than 46%. Like, I feel as though I should be maybe closer to the 60-70% mark of the story, but yet I still have more to go than I've already listened to, if that makes sense. So in some ways it is working for me, but in others, I really just wish it would progress. And I'm hoping that now that Stella is actively on page, I'm hoping that maybe things are going to ramp up a little bit. I'm not sure, like I said, where it's going to go. I don't know what the ultimate end goal of the story is, what the purpose of the story is, but I am absolutely along for the ride. I really do hope that I am able to finish this tomorrow, and if I am, I will come on at that point and let you know my final thoughts on The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Good morning, everyone. So you might notice something different. I officially have one of these cool microphone things that all the real BookTube YouTube people seem to be using. So we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to have to test this out because this is like literally the first clip that I'm using to film, but you will see this vlog well after I have filmed a bunch of formal videos with this. So hopefully the sound is not too bad. I'm going to have to play around with it and see. I've had some people complain about the audio on my videos, but anyway, I am here because I finished The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And honestly, y'all, I have really conflicted feelings about it because first of all, I felt like this was entirely too long for what it was. This audiobook was only maybe about 11 hours, and I can typically finish an 11-hour audiobook in maybe 2.5 days. But we are going on day 4 now because I just did not have any urge to listen to it outside of a time when I would naturally be listening to it. You know, like when I'm getting ready for work, when I'm driving to and from work, when I'm doing chores and all that stuff, I would naturally be listening to an audiobook during that time, but I didn't have any inkling to like pick it up and listen to it while I was doing a hobby or something to that effect, just because I wasn't that invested or engrossed in the story. I felt like this was very, very meandering. Some of the perspectives in this story, I'm not entirely sure what we got. And by the end of the story, I still didn't feel like we had a resolution. I didn't feel like I understood what the message was of the story, what point I was supposed to get out of it. So ultimately, I feel like I read that whole book, but I don't understand why I read that whole book. I think I mentioned in a past clip that when I originally started this story, I was thinking that it was more contemporary. And something else that I just assumed about this story was that this was going to be about the sibling relationship between Desiree and Stella, and ultimately what happens after they like maybe come back together after living their own separate lives. And that's not what this was at all. They were entirely separate for the vast majority of the story, except for one instance when Stella returns to Desiree for the sheer purpose of Stella wanting to tell Desiree for her daughter to back off. I don't think I had gotten to the point in the story yet where Jude actually connects with Stella's daughter Kennedy, and she realizes who Kennedy is and who Stella is and that they are related. And she doesn't necessarily start to cause trouble, but she does tell Stella that she knows who she is and that she is Desiree's daughter. And she does tell Kennedy that they are cousins, and it causes a little bit of turmoil for Stella. And so she's actually going to Louisiana to tell Desiree to have Jude back off. And that's literally it. Like, that is it. There really is no resolution to that relationship. There is no reconnection with that relationship. And that is fine because, you know, I am somebody that truly believes that if you want to disconnect from people in your life, even if they are family, that is fine. You have your own reasons for doing that. Although I really didn't necessarily agree with Stella's reasons. but I cannot say that I have ever or will ever walk in the shoes of Stella or any other person of color who would be dealing with some of the same things that Stella and Desiree have to go through. Stella made this decision to pass as white because she knew that her life would be easier and freer if she were to do that. And so she made that decision, and Desiree made a different choice. So I cannot really fault or judge Stella for doing what she did, because I cannot say that I will ever be in her place, and I don't know what decision I would make if I had been in her place, if that makes sense. So I don't necessarily want to say that I feel like these sisters should have reconnected, but I do feel like that is what I wanted from this story, and that's what I was hoping for the story. As I mentioned, at the end of the story, I felt that this was very unresolved, and I'm not entirely sure where these characters are going to go and what I was supposed to feel about them, and ultimately I didn't really feel anything. I did not have an emotional connection to this story whatsoever, and by the time it was over, I was very, very much ready for it to be over. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to rate it at this point, because on the one hand, I do think that it was wonderfully written, and I don't think that you can read a very character-driven novel like this one where you are so deeply entrenched in the lives of very specific characters without having it be some type of memorable experience, right? I don't think that this was a forgettable read, so I don't necessarily know if it deserves a 3 stars just because of how well I do think it was written and how vivid I really do think that the characters were. But overall, I can't necessarily say that I enjoyed this book. I can't necessarily say that it's something that I would recommend. So I think I'm going to settle on like a 3.5 stars for this. So not the best read, definitely not a failure by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly was not my favorite. I feel like that was really rambly. I feel like I wasn't able to cohesively and articulately state how I felt about the story. And I feel badly about it because I know that so many people love this, and I feel like it's going to resonate with a lot of people. It didn't hit me like I was expecting it to hit me. Anyway, it is time for me to finish getting ready for work, but I will be back with the next one, hopefully soon-ish. All right, everyone. So I am here to close out this vlog because I have actually started and finished the last book for this round of reading Book of the Year Finalists. It ended up being a pretty quick read that I was able to fly through really easily. And during that time, I really didn't have an opportune moment to give you an update. And I honestly don't necessarily know how much I would have even been able to tell you at the 50% mark, because the book itself is very, very character driven. It is literally all about the characters within the story, very light on the overall plot. So I'm not sure there would have been anything that I could have told you anyways. So I do apologize that I didn't come on here with a 50% check-in, but at the same time, I think that my overall wrap-up and review will be just as effective. But the book that I'm talking about is Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. Now, I went into this one really trepidatiously because I have not had great luck with Fredrik Backman in the past. I didn't love Beartown like everybody seemed to. I didn't get the hype behind that story. Now, it could have been like a wrong place, wrong time situation, and if I had read that now, maybe I would have appreciated it more, but I just didn't, and I actually DNF'd another one of his stories. So I didn't really know if Fredrik Backman was going to be the author for me, but of course I had to read this one for this vlog project, and I'm happy to say that I actually really enjoyed this story overall. It's not a new favorite or anything, but I had a really decent time with it. One of the things that I will say about this story is that it is in some ways very chaotically written, and I'll get to that in just a second. But the bare bones of the story is essentially that there is a bank robber. Well, they are not a bank robber prior to the story, but essentially they are falling on really hard times, and they are about to get divorced and lose their kids, and the only way they're going to be able to keep partial custody of their kids is by having a place to stay, but they don't have the money for it, and so they want to go ahead and rob a bank. But when they go into the bank, they don't realize it's a cashless bank, and chaos ensues, right? The police are called, the bank robber freaks out, flees across the street into an apartment building where they locate an open house where there are a bunch of prospective buyers in there, and they end up going into this apartment and unintentionally taking these people hostage. Again, that is not their intention at all. It just kind of worked out this way. And we know from basically the beginning of the story that all of the hostages got out. But the mystery is, where is the bank robber? Because the bank robber was not in the apartment when the police got to it. The bank robber was nowhere to be found. So like I said, this story is somewhat chaotically told because it's told in a non-linear, kind of disjointed way. You are getting the story from the police interviews with the hostages. You are getting all of the backstory of each of the hostages in general. And you are also getting the flashbacks to the actual hostage situation and what happened during that time. The narration narration style for the story is definitely third person, omniscient, and in between all of these different timelines of the story, when we're doing the police interviews, when we're doing the hostage backstories, when we're doing all of that stuff, the narrator actually takes the time in between to address the audience periodically. And it uses this time to offer judgment and commentary. And the voice of the narrator is very wry, very philosophical, very self-aware. And it's usually using the commentary to discuss human nature and definitely mental health and kind of like just the absurdity of being an adult. You're kind of following all of these different threads to find out how they all connect, because the characters in the story, they all connect in unexpected ways. And so even though it is kind of chaotically told, it's done in somewhat of an organized way. I didn't find it hard to follow at all, even though it did bounce around and it was very disjointed. I didn't really find it hard to follow. So ultimately, I ended up being pleased when throughout the story, we started to get all of the connections with the characters and how it ultimately ended up resolving itself at the very end. So I thought that this was very, very well written. It was incredibly clever. And I loved some of the commentary that the narrator was making throughout the story as well. So yes, I did have a really good time with the story, but at the same time, because there really wasn't necessarily like a cohesive plot to the story, because the whole point of this was really the characters within the story, it was one of those books that I was able to kind of put down and step away from and not think about, and then dive back in when I picked it up. So it wasn't anything that I was ever gravitating towards reading. So that's why I say that it's not a new favorite, but it did make me really interested in reading more from Fredrik Backman. He had a new release come out this year called My Friends, and I was really intrigued by the synopsis of that story, and I think I would now be more willing to pick it up now that I have read Anxious People. So I think right now I'm gonna settle on probably a 4-star. It might be closer to a 3.5, but I do think that this was so well written and so thought-provoking and just heartwarming overall that I do think that it would be worthy of a 4 stars. I just don't know if my emotional attachment was a 4-star level. All right, so let's go ahead and do a quick recap. As a reminder, this vlog covered the Book of the Year finalists for 2019, 2020, and 2021. For 2019, the finalists were Daisy Jones and the Six, which I had already read prior to this point. Same with Recursion by Blake Crouch and The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. The 2 books that I had to read for this vlog were A Woman Is No Man by E. Toph Rum and This Tenderland by William Kent Kruger. When I'm looking at all of the finalists, first of all, I absolutely love the fact that Daisy Jones and the Six won because I adored that story. I personally think that Evelyn Hugo is better than Daisy Jones and the Six, so the fact that Evelyn Hugo did not win her year was a little bit disappointing to me, but I'm glad to see that Daisy Jones did get her time in the spotlight. I thought that was a really uniquely told story, especially if you were listening to it. It was definitely very, very captivating. I can understand why Recursion by Blake Crouch is on here because he just writes these very captivating, fast-paced thrillers that are very complicated in the science that goes behind them, but they really make you think. And so I understand why people love them. Now, The Silent Patient is one that I'm gonna have to disagree with here because I know that this book took the internet by storm. It was kind of like another Gone Girl situation, right? Where it kind of like changed the way that people read thrillers. But this is another situation where like I kind of read it and I thought it was decent at the time, but now that I look back on it, I don't remember anything about it. And I remember the twist. I remember the twist. That's basically the only thing that I remember about this, but I don't think that it was anything spectacular. And since this point, I have read every other single Alex Michaelides book that he has released, and I have hated pretty much all of them. And so I think if I were to go back and reread The Silent Patient, I don't think that I would have enjoyed it nearly as much as I did back when I first read it. So this is a situation where I don't think that I agree with the placement of this story in the finalists. I think that there were probably better thrillers that could have gone here, or better just books in general that could have gone here. Now, based on my experience with A Woman Is No Man and This Tenderland, I absolutely adored This Tenderland. I am really grateful for my reading experience with that one, especially since I was really nervous going into it, and I can absolutely see why it was a finalist. I can also see why A Woman Is No Man was a finalist as well. However, as you would have heard in this vlog, I had a lot of issues with it, and those issues really prevented me from enjoying it to the level that I would have really liked to enjoy it. So while I can understand why it was a Book of the Year finalist, and while I can understand its importance, it wasn't my favorite, if that makes sense. Going into 2020, the only 2 finalists that I had read prior to this vlog were The Guest List by Lucy Foley and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Now, I remember loving The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I thought that it was beautifully written, and I just enjoyed watching Addie's story because it's very thought-provoking. Like, what would you do if you could live forever, but nobody would remember you? Like, you can't even turn away from a person without them forgetting you. How do you go through life with that? It must be incredibly lonely. So I really enjoyed Addie LaRue's journey. I thought it was incredibly, incredibly beautiful. The Guest List by Lucy Foley, this is another one that I question. I had a really good time with The Guest List. I remember enjoying it for the most part, but it was nothing mind-blowing at all. It was one of those situations where there were just so many many characters that you had to keep track of. I do think that this is another situation where there were probably going to be better thrillers that could have been put into this category, but this again was another super popular thriller that absolutely blew up in the year that it was released. So I'm not surprised to see it here, but I do think that there were probably better options. Now, the 3 books that I read for this vlog were The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi DeRay, and of course, Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. I won't say anything else about Anxious People since I just got done reviewing it, but I really did enjoy The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abi DeRay. I thought that was a very important and powerful story, and I'm so glad that I read it. I would have never read this story if it had not been for this project. So this was a wonderful choice. The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett is another one that I was just like, I'm not entirely sure I understand the hype behind this one. I think that I went into it with different expectations and I didn't quite get what I was looking for, if that makes sense. So again, I understand the importance of this and I really appreciated the conversations that were initiated in this story. And as somebody who cannot pretty much in any way, shape, or form relate to the experiences within that story, it was very eye-opening, right? It was very eye-opening what these characters were going through, but I was expecting a little bit more and I did find it really meandering at points and very slow. And so ultimately, I can't necessarily say if there was anything better that could have taken the spot for the 2020 finalists, because again, I do understand why this book is there and why it was super popular. It didn't live up to the hype for me. Now, I had read all of the 2021 finalists prior to this point, and I think that just kind of goes to show that I, for the most part, pretty much agree with all of these books being placed in the Book of the Year finalists. The Four Winds was the winner in 2021, and I am a Kristen Hanna stan. I love Kristen Hanna to death. Do I think The Four Winds was her strongest? No. In fact, I really think The Women, The Great Alone, and The Nightingale are all stronger books than The Four Winds, but it has a lot of her signature things. It's very heartbreaking. It's very hard-hitting. The characters go and have to survive some very difficult things, and it doesn't even necessarily like have a happy ending. You know what I mean? So it is a tearjerker, and you're going to get all of the signature things that you're used to in a Kristen Hanna in that story. It just wasn't my favorite Kristen Hanna, but I absolutely agree with its placement here because even my least favorite Hanna is still a strong book. You know what I mean? Malibu Rising, another one that I'm not surprised to see here, right? You have Daisy Jones in the year prior, and then you have The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo a couple of years before that. So am I surprised to see Taylor Jenkins Reid here? Absolutely not. Malibu Rising, I would say prior to the release of Atmosphere, was my least favorite Taylor Jenkins Reid historical, but Atmosphere has definitely taken that place. But I really did have a good time with Malibu Rising. I didn't necessarily think there was too terribly much inherently wrong with it, but it didn't emotionally hit me like the other books that I had read within this same world that she had created. And so that's why it was my least favorite. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I am so glad to see this one here, and I absolutely agree. I know that this is an unpopular opinion, but to be honest, People We Meet on Vacation is one of the strongest Emily Henrys for me. I think it's one of the best friends to lovers books I have ever read. I will die on that hill. That was my very first experience with Emily Henry. It's what caused me to want to read more from her. So I completely am fine with seeing People We Meet on Vacation here because I loved it. And then we have Razorblade Tears, and y'all know how I feel about that story. That is one of the best thrillers that I've ever read in my entire life. It was dark, gritty, so violent, satisfyingly violent. S.A. Cosby could write a phone book if they still existed, and I would read it because this man has a talent. He writes books that are so dark and gritty, and I just love them. He is willing to explore the dark and the morally gray in people, and Razorblade Tears was my first experience with him, and it definitely wasn't my last. I have read, for the most part, S.A. Cosby to zero, and I absolutely love him. So I absolutely think that this deserves a space. I would say the only book that I'm not 100% convinced deserved a space for 2021 was The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. And that's just because when I read it, I thought it was only okay. It didn't do much for me, but I have since read another Sarah Penner, The Amalfi Curse, and I loved it. It's easily one of the best books that I have read so far this year just because of my enjoyment level with that story. And so this is another situation where it could have been wrong place, wrong time. If I reread The Lost Apothecary now, would I love it more than I did back then when maybe this was not a typical story for me to read, if that makes sense. This again is another story that a lot of people really loved and enjoyed. Almost everybody I hear talk about it enjoyed it more than I did. And so this is another one that I really can't go based on my own judgment and opinion of because it's probably a me thing and not a book thing. All right, everybody. And that is it. That concludes this round of reading Book of the Year finalists. I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that you have been having fun and coming along on this journey with me as I'm reading these Book of the Year finalists. Of course, if you have read any of the finalists, please comment down below and let me know what your thoughts are. Do you agree or disagree with any of the opinions that I discussed in this video? I would love to know. Or if you've made it to the end of this video and you are not feeling chatty, go ahead and of course just leave me another award emoji in honor of the Book of the Year finalists. And as always, if you like this video or if you just like me, please be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I typically post 2 videos a week, one on Wednesdays, one on Sundays. and I would love to connect with you in any of those future videos. Or if you would prefer to connect with me outside of BookTube, you can always find links to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Patreon down below, along with any books featured in the video. Until next time, y'all. Bye.